Hi everyone, it's Mr. Lawrence here. Welcome to the second week of Horrible Histories Club. Last week we read about the Rotten Romans. This week we're going to be having a look at horrid Henry VIII. Right, Henry's dad, Henry VII, becomes king after killing Richard III at the Battle of Bosworth Field. Henry VII has two sons, Arthur, the oldest and the favourite, and Henry, the other one. In 1502, Arthur dies, and Henry is now heir to the throne. Henry VII dies, and young Henry becomes king. The new king finds any old excuse to party, even with his old enemies, like the King of France, Francis III. But both kings try to outdo each other at games, feasting, and fancy dress. Weedy Francis trips Henry up during a wrestling match, which is not such a good idea. Peace between England and France doesn't last much longer than the party. In fact, Henry enjoys waging war against France and Scotland as much as he does partying, even though he doesn't often win, because he's busy fighting the French when the Scots invade. Henry's missus, Henry's wife, Catherine, sends in an army to fight them off, and she wins. The battle at Flodden is Henry's greatest success. It's just a shame she's not there, that he's not there. Even though Catherine saves Henry's hide, he still sulks about not having a son. Horrible Henry decides to swap Catherine for a new wife. Henry sends Cardinal Wolsey to have a word with the Pope about ditching wife number one, but the Pope says no way. Henry blows his top and throws Wolsey in jail and starts up his own church, the Church of England. He allows himself to cancel his own marriage. So Henry marries Anne Boleyn, and she soon has a baby girl. So and for the chop, Henry really wanted a boy. Jane Seymour's next in line for the job. Finally, Henry gets a son, but poor Jane croaks. Upset? Well, not that much. Henry decides to look for another bride. He agrees to marry Anne of Cleves after only seeing a picture of her. When his new wife arrives from Flanders, which is in Belgium, Henry realises he's made a big mistake. Wife number 5 is a bit of a minx, so she loses her head. Finally, Henry marries another Catherine. She makes a good stepmom and knows how to handle old Henry. Henry finds himself strapped for cash, Mary at the head of a church, and the monasteries must be his to sell, so that's what he does. Henry's old enemy, France, attacks the British fleet. He looks as his prize warship, the Mary Rose, tips over and sinks without a trace during the battle. Henry begins to feel that everyone is getting at him. Before going to sleep, every night he has his bedroom door bricked up. By the time Henry dies in 1547, he is feared and hated. The once handsome and popular king has become so bloated and bonkers that no one's sorry to see him go. Henry leaves behind 3 children, Mary, Elizabeth and Edward. It's the 9-year-old Edward that takes the throne. Like the Tower of London, this is where Henry VIII and his children imprisoned, tortured and killed the people who messed with them. Tower Hill, this is where ordinary people got their heads cut off in front of thousands of bloodthirsty spectators. Beauchamp Tower, prisoners locked up in this tower passed the time by carving graffiti into the walls of their cells. The Bell Tower is where posh prisoners were put. Elizabeth was locked up here for 3 months by her own sister Mary. The tower is said to be swarming with spooks. One of the strangest incidents occurred when a tower guard was reportedly attacked by a ghostly bear. The poor man dropped dead of fright, or he just couldn't bear it. Tower Green. The headsman did his gruesome work here, chopping off the heads of posh people. They were the only ones to have had the honour of a private execution. The Bloody Tower. A terrible history. The 8th Earl of Northumberland shot himself here after being accused of treason by Elizabeth I. The Traitors' Gate. Traitors were led through this gate to face imprisonment, torture and death. Many that came through, not many of them came back. The White Tower. This tower had many uses. It contained royal apartments, banqueting rooms and a torture chamber, but these chambers were deep in the basement so the posh people didn't have to listen to the screams whilst they were having their dinner. The smallest cell in the tower was called the Little Ease. It was so tiny that prisoners weren't able to stand up or lie down. The worst cell to be locked in was the notorious Cave amongst the Rats. Imagine being imprisoned in a dank, dark cave swarming with squeaky vermin. Tales from the Tower. In 1533, Robert Dallywell was imprisoned in the tower for bad-mouthing the king. He got off relatively easy. His body was stretched on a rack and his ears were chopped off, and then he was released. So Henry VIII wasn't so mean after all. The Bloody Tower had got its reputation in the time of Richard III. He was in this tower before he became king. But Richard is said to have his 2 nephews murdered. Why? Because the boys were the rightful heirs to the throne. In 1647, the bones of 2 young boys were dug up in the tower grounds. They are the remains of Richard's unfortunate nephews. Nobody knows for sure. In 1540, Arthur Plantagenet was tried for treason at the tower, but he was declared innocent. This was so unusual and unexpected that poor old Arthur dropped dead on the spot from the shock. Talk about unlucky. It wasn't only people who were locked up in the tower. In the Middle Ages, it also served as the Royal Zoo. Okay, well that's it for this week's Horrible Histories Club. I'll see you next week for the next episode. Thanks. Bye.